Andrew Muir, Chief Executive Officer of the Wilderness Foundation, and the topic of his presentation tonight is On the Horns of a Dilemma.
Right now, we need at least 1 3/4 planets to sustain ourselves going forward. And so one must see rhino within that context, that we are at a point now in our existence as a human race where the actions literally that are already being taken and some actions that we've already put into place will result in 20% extinction. And we have to ask ourselves, what does this say about us? We must realize that rhino is a charismatic flagship species. Rhino we can see, rhino we can touch, rhino we can have a very deep symbolic relationship with. Rhinos stem from the dinosaur age. There's a mystic, there's a deep connection with that particular species. It is scientifically not possible for a species to be saved from an extinction event twice. These are the various species of rhino and the numbers as we know them. This may be out by a couple of rhino per species. Rhino relatively was a global species in various subspecies, but over the last 100 years, most of these species are heading towards extinction. So in the 1960s, the issue was whether we could keep the white rhino, whether we could prevent that species from going to extinction. Black rhino is coming back, but the white rhino has been the success story. Whilst all these other populations around the world have diminished, that South Africa has actually become the custodian of the rhino on this earth. Because 90%, if you add that all up, of rhinos that we find in the world are found here. It's become our problem because other countries were not able to, for whatever reasons, control the problem there. South Africa is the vanguard. Right, what is causing this? It's the powdered form that has been used as a traditional medicine. At least 50 to 70% of the horn that's going to the east goes via Vietnam, and the majority of that stays in Vietnam. 2010, 330 to 11,434. In the first 5 months of this year, as of yesterday, 245. In the wild, free roaming, our prediction, this is the Wilderness Foundation's prediction, at current numbers, knowing how much rhino we have, knowing the population birth rates and what happens when you get to negative growth rate, which we're not there yet, but unfortunately, if things continue the way they are, we could be there in the next 7 years. Then by 2020, we could be in negative population growth, and by 2030, we could be very close to extinction. This spike for South Africa has coincided with an economic boom that has taken place in the east. So just about half to over half are being lost out of the Kruger. Eastern Cape is still quite well intact. Have lost minimal rhino in comparison to the populations that we have in this province. I don't believe in today's age that when human beings can do that, that we can really call those incidents poaching. I mean, I don't believe we're dealing with a poaching crisis. We're dealing with, this is the worst kind of criminal element that you could imagine. And I think this word poaching, personally, is too kind. I wouldn't call that poaching. I'll just call that an act of absolute brutality. To dart an animal and then literally remove half its face and then move off while it wakes up and has to endure that pain, which none of us here can possibly imagine, defies description. This is what I think really resonates. And this is what really makes people angry, and justifiably so. How can we possibly condone that? How can we, as humans, no matter what our religious beliefs are, if we are custodians of nature and of our environment, then goodness me, we've done a terrible job. Right now, there isn't one solution to this crisis, and I don't think there can be, because of the magnitude of it and because of how entrenched it is in certain cultural beliefs. You know, as terrible as this crisis is, when we're dealing with HIV/AIDS and all the issues that we're dealing with, it's impossible, absolutely impossible, to allocate adequate resources to everything, which is not to say that this is not as important as other issues are. I believe it is. And actually, this crisis could not be happening at a worse time in our history as a country. Whilst this is a tragedy that's occurring here, we are custodians of this species due to the fact that it's been decimated everywhere else in the world. So we are calling for a global solution. If we say that a species on this earth only has value if it serves us, then I think we really are condoning ourselves to the Ice Age, I think. Throughout Africa now, there's a concern, again, about ivory and elephant. We also know, coming out of Botswana, the number of species that have been killed and poached there. Not just rhino, not just elephant. Because of the stress and strain of our time and the stress and strain on our planet. So understand that this rhino crisis is giving conservation as a whole an opportunity to do what it should be doing. If we don't sort this out now, it'll just move to another crime. If there's one thing we need to do, we need to keep this rhino debate in the public domain. We have the legal framework in place. We've had it in place since 1976. But we've got to realize here that we are dealing with highly organized crime syndicates. I mean, we really are dealing with a level of wildlife crime that we've never had to even begin to cope with globally. And so there is big, big, big money in this. Right now, to trade illegally in rhino horn is more lucrative than trading in cocaine. We can only deal with it if we have the full global police forces working with us. Also, one of the tragedies of this indiscriminate kind of poaching is we now have a real rhino orphan crisis on our hands. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of cost, it's a lot of resource. Again, as a country, we're not really geared to deal with that kind of crisis. You will find that there are roughly 150 organizations raising money for rhino. I can tell you, being involved in conservation for 25 years now, I can probably identify 20, maybe 30 of those organizations. We have another crisis where there are a lot of organizations, individuals, that are being very opportunistic, and I fear that they are not raising money for rhino. And so there's another element of criminality here. I almost feel that organizations and individuals that do that in some ways are as bad as the poachers themselves. Believe it or not, this is a very safe and a very good way of translocating game. And I think that we must keep patting ourselves on the back for the incredible conservation work that we have done and that we continue to do, that our rangers on the ground sometimes come up against these criminal syndicates that have night vision equipment. They don't have a chance. It's important that our rangers on the ground are properly equipped. And this is where America and other countries can really help us. Thermal imaging drones flying over a protected area could do the work that 100 rangers do. What is needed is money in order to equip the APUs, your anti-poaching mechanisms, your police forces, in order to buy the equipment and enforce and to ensure that we protect. What's needed is champions to take that issue to the countries where the problem, where the demand is, and to ensure at the same time that we are trying to reduce the supply by protecting populations even more than we have been up until now. But you know, a global fund for rhino, 500 million rand, would actually go a very long way to doing exactly what I say. And I end by a quote from our founder, Ian Player, and he says, it is only through a global campaign and political will that we can save this remnant of the dinosaur age, the rhino. Rhino have a particularly plaintive cry, which once heard is never forgotten. The screams of agony from rhino that have had their horns chopped off whilst still alive should reach out into the hearts of all of us.